All right, welcome everybody to the Sprint Jump Throw Performance Podcast. I'm Joel Reinhardt, along with my co-host Andrew Cormier. We're lucky today to have Coach John Garrish on the show. He is the Director of Athletic Performance and Development, as well as the head track and field at North Broward Prep down in South Florida. Thanks for coming on, Coach.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of certainly what I've seen you continue to your development as a coach, Joel, and us being in contact over the last few years. And especially, I think it's easy to say for somebody that's like-minded, especially, Andrew, with our first interaction, excuse me, not too long ago, but seeing you guys and your, just the idea of the podcast, I think it's easy if we're like-minded to say that what you guys are doing is awesome, but I'll still go ahead and say it that I appreciate what y'all are doing. I think you're fighting a good fight, and it's an important part of our coaching development, and I really appreciate you letting me be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it. All right, we'll hop right in. So anybody who follows you on social media will hopefully go, oh yeah, I've seen this, where the galloping.
Sure.
You've been harping on it lately. I guess, where did that kind of, not necessarily, because obviously it's something that we all kind of know about, but like what was the event or maybe coaching session or whatever that kind of sparked you to be like, oh, I'm going to kind of dive back into this and, relook at, those benefits?
Yeah. So I think it was Rob Assisi that first I heard talking about just like galloping drills. So I guess a little background about at least I'll give you my last 6 or 7 years of background. I've been the director of athletic development, basically the strength and conditioning coordinator at North Broward Prep, which is a high school, middle school. We also have students from pre-K on up, but I work with the middle schoolers and high schoolers. I think this was, and forgive me because it happened at like mid-year, I believe this was my 4th season as the school's head track and field coach. So that came on late. All right. So, and with that, I think a lot of things kind of branched out in my own kind of seeking of knowledge for sure. But it was like my head was so far underwater with some of the particulars of the event. So I was a football player all my life, and then I had one too many concussions, picked up track and field, and ended up being a hammer thrower. Hammer throw is not a high school event. I did throw shot put, and I never really threw discus, but I threw shot put, and it might have made the most sense for if I was going to be the school's head track and field coach to coach them as an event in particular. But I thought that, and this was from our athletic department as well, that the best bet would be for the best of our strength and conditioning program, for the best of our track and field program, probably the bulk of those multi-sport kids were going to be sprinters. And have a fantastic throws coach who happens to be our defensive coordinator on the football team. So that those guys are going to be bought in both to what we're doing in the weight room, certainly continuing what we're doing from a speed standpoint. Those guys still very much so train like sprinters. And so that made the most sense to keep him right in that spot and for me to work with the sprinters. Quickly, I found a fantastic friend and who's now a friend. At that point, it was just a kind of local hurdles coach that I knew that took over our hurdlers coaching on campus. And so ultimately, it left me with working with the sprinters and the jumpers. So once I started trying to figure out the jumps, especially the horizontal jumps, high jumps still new to me, still a little bit foreign to me. So trying to figure out long jump, triple jump, stumbled probably onto Rob's work. I don't know if that was a result of an interaction with Tony or if it just kind of happened through social media or something like that. But I was just such a fan of what he was doing and his simple application to coaching the horizontal jumps. That it really helped me kind of, and I remember hearing him talk about once from a long jump penultimate approach, meaning in working on the penultimate step of the jump, that gallops were a really good idea. So we did a bunch of gallop drills, and I know that's been an idea that's been, probably bounced back and forth from horizontal jump coaches for decades, I'm sure. So I certainly don't mean to steal any light from those guys. It's just who I heard it from first and who I saw it from first. So we started working with our horizontal jumpers, which are mostly just about everyone in my track program is a multi-sport kid. So I started to see some things when we were going through like very simple gallops for height, gallops for distance, that, it kind of piqued my interest. It definitely helped us with the jumps. But then I really started to see like some of those things that kind of at the same time running parallel that I was starting to hear and read about, the reality of movement in the biomechanics of sprinting versus like what I had previously thought. These two parallels were kind of running alongside each other. So I was learning the horizontal jumps. I think I was getting a little bit better in understanding the biomechanics of sprinting, seeing that there was a higher degree of rotation depending on what each athlete's efficiency level is, or really what I would label as efficient depending on the athlete. And we saw some of these same things in the gallops. So not only did I now understand it as a good drill for the penultimate step of long jump, I also started to see, of course, I think probably, I mean, I don't know, I can't really remember back to my elementary school PE days, but I'm sure I had a great PE teacher. I'm sure she had me and he had me. They were co-teachers. I'm sure they had me galloping. And the reason for it, of course, is the gross motor skill. Just a very, very simple low-level plyometric. It can be low level, it could be mid-level, it could be high level. But basically going back to that kind of coordination idea was also a big part of it. So then I started to implement it with our middle schoolers as well. But very many of the same reasons why we apply power skips. I think power skips have been something that have been used by coaches, and again, skips and gallops for years. But certainly it's kind of, power skips might be a little more popular in, a general strength and conditioning setting. And some of that is because it's easier for a, young person to be able to get the pattern. Gallops, although they're not more advanced, they probably haven't done it in a while. But the fact that the right foot, the left foot are doing two different things, although it's still kind of a cyclical pattern. There's a lot of reasons, and forgive me for that long story, but there's a lot of reasons that we ended up kind of revisiting it and expanding it from being a drill that we were simply using with our long jumpers really to everybody from, no matter what sport they're in, no matter what, I don't want to say no matter what time of year, but gallops are something that we use almost throughout the year in a very similar manner that we do power skips throughout the year, no matter what age or no matter what level, no matter what sport the kid is. It's been a big part of our programming.
Oh, I'm muted. Yeah, that's great. I mean, it's like you talked about. It's something that's like, oh yeah, we know what a gallop is, and it's like, okay, when's the last time you implemented it? Do you know the strengths of it? Like all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So just hearing, I mean, not just you, like obviously making it more like visible, of like, hey, I'm implementing this, but even just talking through some of like hey, we're noticing this versus this.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially at the higher level, meaning literally higher level, meaning if we're going gallops for all out height. Again, really the way the foot interacts with the ground, and the manner at which the hip internally rotates for most of our students, meaning the swing side hip internally rotates. I'm not visually looking at somebody galloping right now to think of what that downside, that stance leg is doing, but in most of our athletes, if they're really projecting upward and producing force, much like they would in a power skip probably, but I see it especially more in a gallop, that swing side leg internally rotates as it comes up and through. It externally rotates as it's coming down to the ground, much in the same way as I see in especially upright spinning. Really, I mean, acceleration and their upright max velocities, we see that quite a bit. So I saw that a lot in gallops. I saw shoulders naturally rotate. So Joel, we talked about when I had met with you and the staff, talking about like reasons why we do a lot of things in my programming, working with high school students, really no matter what the age is. A lot of what I think about is how we can best help them learn the movement patterns. I think of it much more in a way of kind of skill development and motor skill acquisition. So in ways that we can hopefully provide some form of constraint or whatever it might be to help the student feel it and feel it on their own, as opposed to like try coaching a kid how to adequately internally rotate their hip when they're sprinting. They'll look at you like you're crazy. So finding ways that we can make that happen for them without ever having to say a word, I think is something that I really try to think about when I apply and program anything that's in there. And gallops have certainly been a big part of that. So I also see like a degree of rotation at the shoulders. If a kid is truly galloping for height or for distance, let's just keep going with talking about for height. The shoulders rotate because they're not, when you have them gallop, they're not thinking of what all of those coaches over years coach them to look like when they're sprinting, if you get what I'm saying. So no matter what, no matter how long we coach a kid, we probably weren't their first coach, or we weren't the first person that told them to sprint, that told them they needed to stay low, they need to not rotate, they need to, run in a straight line, whatever it may be. So no matter what, when they're sprinting, they're thinking about all those things, and they're, whether it's by, it's conscious thought or subconscious, just because they've done it for so long. When we go into a gallop, for height, you see some of those things, the natural rotation of their shoulders, the oscillation of their shoulders as well. Like if you look at a picture, I've back in my own training, it's just a month or so ago, I posted some superimposed pictures of basically different frames of my gallop, and much of the time spent on the ground, or many of the different positions, definitely mirrored what I was doing at upright speeds through sprinting. So that in and of itself, I think to just basically put a young person in an environment that adding maximal effort, especially through those gallops for height, they do things naturally, and they're no longer, consciously thinking about what those coaches have told them. I've started to see some things that, if for nothing else, if they create a bridge for me to, I like using video and photos a lot. If for nothing else, just a bridge to show the kid, look, this is what you're doing there. Don't be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to use your efficient level of rotation. Don't be afraid to rotate. That's been an important piece of the gallops as well.
And looking at between like the gallops and then all the different hand positions you use when teaching different like upright spring mechanics to get them to feel certain things, just imagining from the college level, I can't even imagine maybe the high school level and middle school, maybe them thinking it looks a little goofy and not wanting to try it. Was there any sort of like selling you almost have to do on it, or are they pretty like right into it?
You know what, gallops those were that kind of at first, especially because if I tell tomorrow morning I'll be working with a socially distanced group, and some of them will be new, and the new few that I tell them to gallop, they're going to be like, what the heck, I don't remember how to gallop. So I have to tell them, I have to bring it back down, and I have to say, okay, you're going to go very low level, and you're going to keep your right foot behind your left, and you're basically going to gallop like a horse. And then they start to get it, and I'll have a demonstration for them, and they feel pretty silly when you do things like that. It might feel a little silly, but it does. It's just like anything else. I mean, it's when when those kids know that there's a reason behind it. You know what I mean? If you just give a very simple context to the reason why we're doing it, usually that's all it takes.
Awesome.
You know what I mean? And more often than not, if I'm seeing somebody for the first time, that might not be the first thing that we do, just so that we don't throw everything off, and that's the first thing they get a grasp of when we get out there to train. But definitely a reasonable thought. Hand positions, I haven't had much pushback on those. That's been and I think those are ones. So like for me, I like to, and this is just like general coaching philosophy, I suppose. I like to coach explanations before and after whatever we've done, drill, exercise, session, I like to coach explanation so they understand why we're doing it going into it and why we've done it coming out of it. I use much more words there than I do in the actual repetition, if that makes sense. So oftentimes I will take a couple minutes to say, hey, this is exactly why we're doing it. And it almost always is capped off with, I want you to do what comes natural to you. Because those drills and those hand positions and those gallops, I've programmed because it doesn't take much thought from the kid. I just want them to do it naturally. And through practice and seeing some of our kids train, I've seen that this is a good way to kind of get some sort of response out of them that we're looking for. Again, that's been much more beneficial than, seriously, I mean, try telling a kid to oscillate their left shoulder higher than their right shoulder while still internally rotating their hip. It's ridiculous. You know, we would never do that. However, you can get that same response out of them by maybe applying some sort of constraint or drill that covers that. So yeah, there hasn't been too many issues with that. Again, I use time and on the front end to kind of explain to the kids why we're doing it. I definitely, like, I'm level with them when a kid kind of looks at me crazy when I tell them to gallop. I understand, you know, but pretty soon they, you know, now, I mean, especially after a kid's done it once or twice, I mean, they are trying to get it. You know, they understand it as much as they do power, you know, just a common vertical jump that you know, any other form of jump or plyometric exercise we do, they understand and approach it with intent, just the way they do those.
Awesome.
And that's even something like in being able to have something in your arsenal that most on your team are probably going to initially be terrible at is probably actually, we found it beneficial. Like, I don't know, when we first started, we consider being able to speed bound a pretty high priority for our skill players. And there were a bunch of guys who were not very adept at it at all.
Oh,
so it was almost like a good selling point where you get some of the like, coach, but I'm already fast. You know, we got some like sub 10, 500 meter dudes. They're like, coach, I'm already fast. And I was like, yeah, but
Can I borrow one or two, man?
Yeah. It was like, hey, you doing 20 yards of speed bounds looked like, you know, my mom could have done that better. So like,
Sure.
yeah, you're fast, but like, see where there's still areas where you can improve coordination and, you know, cycling or whatever it may be. So like, yes, you're fast, but you're, you know, even having something in the arsenal that's like, hey, you're bad at this essentially is almost like a good little butt of like, hey, you can still get better at this, basically.
Yeah, and if they're true competitors, they're going to. You know, if
Yeah.
they're complacent with what they are, you know, you'll probably, unfortunately, always struggle with teaching that kid how to speed bound. But if they're true competitors and they want to be not just as good as their teammates, but better, and continue to assert some form of, I don't know if dominance is the word. Certainly a sub 10 500 meter would be dominance at, you know, if they're coming out of high school. You know, those are guys you want in your program anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So you touched on it briefly when you're going into your explanation of the gallops, but you're talking about when you were learning some of the differences in the actual reality of sprint mechanics versus what you initially learned.
No.
So, I mean, this could take us into a 5-hour episode, but
Yeah, it definitely could.
Maybe just a couple like highlights.
Yeah. Yeah, I just gave, you know, my that's been really my baby over, is just trying to continue to get a better grasp of what it should really look like. And number one, the first thing I'll say is that it's not just something that applies to everybody. Everybody's going to move in a much different way. Everybody's going to walk different. Everybody's going to jog different. Everyone's going to jump different. Everyone's going to sprint different. There's so much that goes into it, from anthropometrics to positions, of course, and what sport they've come up playing, to different foot types, different you know, muscle fiber types. I mean, there's so much. Some kids are a little more fascially driven than some kids are a little more I guess muscly or kind of rocked up type of cats. There's so much that goes into it, and this is definitely this is like a full dang course in itself, that conversation. But the things that I would say I saw the most, and I wish for the first few years of my coaching career, I wish I didn't try to coach kids out of rotating. That's a big thing everywhere, meaning from the hips to the rotation and different movement that's coming from the foot and ankle to the shoulders to even the hands to everything that's happening or throughout a sprint. It seems like almost every joint is, and that is, I understand how the human body works, but every joint seems to be rotating in an efficient manner. And when kids are really rolling, so one of the things, and I've given this example a few times in presentations in the past, but I got to talk about 10-5 guys. I got to see a state championship 100-meter race that was 2A out of 4A. I mean, school size doesn't make all that much difference down here because our private schools are pretty good from an athletic standpoint. But in just this classification, and really all of the guys came from, really it was just Broward and Dade County, largely Broward County too, at the state championship meet. Out of 9 competitors in the final, I think at least I would say 6 of them I think had run sub 10-4. And then a couple others where, I mean, and you're talking about, I don't want to mention kids' names or anything like this. All of those kids, my point in saying this is all of those kids now are college football players at a high level. And I don't want to mention the kids' names, but a couple of them, certainly at least one he was running, I think he went 10:08 at that meet. I mean, you're talking about guys that are really rolling. So my thought before that, and I had a young man that I was coaching to that point that was just and he's playing receiver at one of the biggest schools out there. And I just kept trying to get him to stop rotating internally, rotating his hip, stop having so much lateral sway on his start. But this dude, I mean, this kid's probably 6'2" or 6'3", 205 pounds, this extremely powerful kid that was efficiently rotating and attacking the ground with so much force. And for some reason, I just kept trying to get him to line him up, for lack of a better saying. And then I watched that competition from right at the finish line, dead on where they were running towards. And the rotation, I noticed every single one of them had a great degree of internal rotation of the hip, basically their knees coming across their midline, or at least to their midline, as they came back and externally rotated against the ground. And at that point, I was just like, and you see, I was thinking about it the other day, like we see all these, like I was thinking about it especially with triple jumpers, was like, because I think Boo talked about in the Altus horizontal jumps course, like he obviously oscillation and rotation is going to be a big point of his conversation. But the amount of times that I thought about like some of our fastest or some of our our most athletic, and thought, well, just imagine if he did this better, when at the end of the day this, whatever that is, it might very well be the reason that they're so good at what they do. And so, and sometimes that does become not like a cop out that people are trying not to coach by any means, or that I'm trying not to coach. But sometimes that can become a cop out for like, well, maybe let's just not pay any attention to the biomechanics of sprinting at all and just let them do what they do. I think there's some value in that, certainly. You guys know, and I know you are as well, because I think you've already had him on twice. Tony Holler is one of my idols. He's a person that I look up to so much, and the reason why we use Feed the Cats type of programming largely is because that gives them the opportunity to sprint all out, think about nothing much else than sprinting fast, and that's their opportunity to just apply it how they do. Then we have a technical approach to it that looks a little bit different. It's not necessarily going to be like that. And our technical sprints, meaning like some of those with constraints, some of those with different hand positions, whatever it may be, those are still probably going to be for time, because now those kids aren't thinking about, what their shoulders are doing or what their hips are doing, and instead they're just getting it and going. So I know that was a long way of answering it, but definitely like trying to get a kid to stop rotating was the big thing then. Certainly have like continued the kinegram method and biomechanical approach that Altus has put out has been astronomical in some of my changes from a just thought, just an approach to sprinting. But then again, it's gone further than that. So not only like the kinegram, I think is, the kinegram method is so to that side view. The story is told from head on and really behind as well. That is important to look at as well. So, that's where I would say the biggest changes have come.
Would you almost say the way strength and conditioning almost tried to like pigeonhole teaching sprint mechanics almost kind of led to a lot of people's train of thought going that way of just like, these wall drills have to be super stiff with how you do everything. You got to strike the ground, and it almost just takes away like any extra movement, and you're just so worried about getting those 1-2 things done.
Yeah, I don't love like, I don't love finding a scapegoat, especially the strength and conditioning profession. I think we get such a bad rep, and I think it goes both ways. And another like 3-hour conversation could be basically on, I am so blessed and thankful that I get to be both the track coach and the strength coach, because that doesn't happen anywhere else. And usually if there's conflict with a coach, it's more often than not track coaches and strength coaches. And the reason, among other things, is just volume is so important to both of us, and making sure that we're not overloading the kids, but also there's some kind of technical differences in our learning and teaching coming up through the ranks in each of our career paths that might be very different. So I don't think it's specifically the strength and conditioning industry or coaches. I think largely as we continue to understand more and seek understanding greater, it becomes a little bit easier to create certifications. And not that certifications by any means are wrong, that's not what I mean, but finding ways to apply some of those drills, and then the reasoning tied to them are sometimes flawed. So like wall drills, I've had this conversation a few times actually in the last week with some coaches, is like wall drills. The thing about wall drills is they're really hard at some point. If you use them a lot, they're really hard at any point to get out of your program. And there's something that just mentally, like it's something that when I use wall drills, again, kind of for the same reasons, probably was thinking like just straight forward, straight back, straight forward, straight back. Your posture is a straight line, 45 degrees, and that doesn't move at all. I think many of those drills lead to teachings that are flawed. And again, I don't think that's necessarily the profession of strength and conditioning. I don't think that's necessarily, and some of those thoughts and some of those practices that were introduced were well thought out or well intended, I guess I should say. You know what I mean? It's not like somebody's trying to design something for a kid to run slower. It's just, and you could go to the Olympics in 2021, and I bet if you talk to one, you got one guy in lane 4 and you talk to his coach, and one guy in lane 5 and you talk to his coach, they're going to have completely different answers for you. And one of them might say that we've got to line him up, we've got to straighten him out. And the other one might say we got to let him do what he does, or her. So I think it's still, I think there's still so much room to grow. But I think all of that is still well intended. I think regardless of what profession, I think regardless of really what line of learning or thinking. I think it's just things that, to the blind eye, just watching a guy run, you might think, okay, well, if they're moving laterally, I mean, just that could go back to elementary school class or middle school class and thinking, okay, the easiest way from point A to point B is a straight line, and think, okay, well, that's what we got to do when the human body and physics don't really necessarily work like that. But again,
Yeah.
another.
I know a kind of an aha moment for me where I was like, I'm an idiot, was at least in team, Andrew can kind of speak to this too, and at least in college, a lot of the issues that I've run into when it's like, okay, whether it's a new kid or it's a new team I'm working with, big issue from a pelvic standpoint in team sport athletes is no lack of control or complete lack of control or no control in terms of controlling their pelvis anterior posterior, and just like, being super dumped and have no control over it. Not that being an anterior tilt is automatically bad, but we have absolutely no control over it, and they're just flopping all over. And in implementing things to help tweak that, and even if they were successful in helping them gain control or an understanding of control of their pelvis in that plane, I think it might have inadvertently put them out of some of that rotation because they were focusing so much on the control.
Yeah.
Which was probably needed, in most of these cases that I'm talking about. It's like, okay, maybe we learned that, but then still then going back to like, hey, we want control in this way, but we do want some whip. And you mentioned Boo, like the analogy that Boo gave, I forget exactly what talk or whatever, but he was like, it's like the handle of a whip. I think it was World Speed Summit. He's like, your pelvis needs to be the handle of a whip. Like if you're just going all over the place,
that's a great point.
There's no snap at all.
Yeah.
But then if you obviously don't move at all, there's also no snap at all. So you need to get the quick oscillations, whatever. And that was one for me where I was like, oh, I'm really stupid. I've been messing that up essentially.
Boo could say today's Friday, and I would say I feel really stupid. Anything, and it's just like, holy. I mean, he's definitely one of those guys that we ought to pay. And track and field and strength and conditioning. Thankfully, I think the strength and conditioning profession has really paid him his respect that he deserves, which has been a good thing. Of course, track and field has as well, but just really great information from him.
Yeah. So I guess we touched on kind of maybe our own preconceived notions about sprinting, but and you touched on it a little bit earlier of how important is it when you're working with athletes to identify early on and then potentially squash or reinforce any sort of preconceived notions that they have about sprinting coming into working with you.
Yeah. Good luck because they got the, and again, I hate to use like scapegoats, but they're going to have their speed ladder guy on Saturday morning, and they got their beach trainer on Sunday afternoon, and they got their other powerlifting coach at the gym down the street, and then they got the fancy facility coach that's down the other side of the street. And you got all of these different influences being poured in there. I think one of the extreme benefits and one of the big things about, and no matter what, especially, and it's going to vary, and forgive me, I'll come back to it, but I'm going to get off on a tangent here. Many of the schools, especially down here, there aren't too many that have full-time strength and conditioning coaches. Many of them are and will continue to be the private schools for now, because they're seeking and finding the funding, and they understand the importance. And I think the public schools do as well, but I think there's just a lot of room to grow from an education standpoint. First we have to, pay teachers, and then, I think coaches will get taken care of. But being able to be a full-time strength and conditioning coach on campus, and the reason why I say that, I'm a full-time strength and conditioning on campus where our kids are phenomenal, their families have the means to get them as much training as they want. You know what I'm saying? So although in those other public schools, unfortunately, there's people that dip their hand in there for what I would argue to be really, really at least misguided reasons behind it. But many of those kids aren't necessarily going to have the means to, you know, go to a trainer here, go to a trainer there. But again, you have some guys that kind of just pull them and are hoping maybe to get something out of the back end. For us, we have kids that bounce around, but being the person that they see on a daily basis, being the person, it means a lot more. It means a lot more being in my position, saying something. If I'm the person that they see between third and fourth period versus I'm just the, and hopefully that makes sense. What I mean by that is like they're going to different facilities, they're training with different coaches, potentially, not all of our kids. But at the end of the day, I'm seeing them all day, every day, and the education piece there is really beneficial. So, and even like I've had to explain, so that young man that I was talking about, that I was coaching in many of the wrong ways early on, like he was back during COVID and I was coaching him basically. We were doing a PVC on his shoulder sprint. He was like, "You want me to not rotate, right?" And I was like, "No, man. I want you to just sprint how you feel is necessary to get there as fast as possible." And he kind of gave me a like, "What happened to you?" Type of look. But so, you know, having the opportunity, the more I have the opportunity to work with the kids, you guys see that for one, very not just the kid, not just the coach that's there on campus. I try to be as active on social media, not just with coaches, but with the kids as well, within reason. Of course, we're talking about high school kids, but blasting them out, promoting the heck out of them, and sharing some of the reasons why. Like they benefit from seeing some of my explanations on social media just as much as they do in but so I think that kind of visual explanation, I think, you know, in much the same way, like we can just, I can, you know, and fortunately and unfortunately, I don't, you know, I don't love, especially with our kids, using extreme examples. Like it's so easy. Like the low hanging fruit right now is of course Usain Bolt. And it just happens that he's also, however tall he is, and he sprints in a very different way still from others. But using him as an example of like, this is the fastest human being that ever lived, or at least on record, and he moves in this way. If you rotate, you're going to be okay. You know, like there's a reason why. That's a very simple anecdote to say to the kids. There's a reason why he does that. Straightening him up was not going to get him to a 9.3 or, you know, some, you know, it just, a simple example like that is, although I like our 5'8", 205-pound just bowling ball running back is never going to run like Usain Bolt. But at least seeing Usain Bolt use his natural movements, oscillations, movements all over, up, down, side to side, forward, backward, seeing him use those movements, at least, again, I'm not telling my kids to run like Bolt, but I'm telling them to run in the manner that they feel is most fit, you know, and really to stop thinking so much about coaching, to be honest with you. And again, that's not just a cop out. There's still biomechanical talks that we have, but if, you know, just starting point right there, an example of the fastest human being on record running in a very, very natural way that's fit for him is a pretty good starting point. Or other examples like that, to be completely honest with you. You can look at Tyreek Hill, or, you know, you could look at any sport athlete and you just show them run one time and you slow it down for them and say, look, does it look like this person is, everything is straightforward, straight back? You know, more than likely it's not going to be if they're rolling.
Yeah. And even I was thinking about that, and I don't know, your approach of, you know, a lot of constraints, essentially, kind of taking some of the cues out of your mouth for you,
Definitely.
is an approach that, we definitely utilize as well. But I've noticed in the past where it's like, you get maybe the right constraint for the right group of players, and it's like, okay, this is going well, and then there's one who it's not going great for. And this specific example comes to mind was, a kid who was like, lacking some of that rotation almost. And, it was like, hey, what's going on? Like, I started thinking, like, is T-spine tight? Like, what's going on? And it was just like, he was actively trying to keep his elbows at 90 degrees the entire time, because he had been like yelled at that about that all of high school. And I was like, no, just let it just go run. Like, and then it was like, oh, like, okay. But it was like, if I had never, that was one of the moments where I was like, okay, maybe it's more important than we think to like get a grasp of what they actually think is right. As opposed to, because there's not necessarily, in an ideal situation, you just roll out the perfect constraints, and it's like, all right, we're gonna let them self-organize while also, fixing any sort of aberrations within a certain bandwidth. But if they're actively trying to do something the other way, it's like, oh, maybe we need to squash that. But yeah.
Definitely would be nice if you can just apply one thing and it works for everybody. I think it's just kind of finding what's right and trying to meet the needs of everybody. And that's been big for me because, you're talking about large group sizes at varying ages and usually very young ages. So no, that's a big reason kind of why I went towards some of the constraints-based approach. But also it still does, there still is the the couple outliers that there might be something beneath the surface there.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess getting a little more X's and O's technical.
Sure.
So we've touched on, some of the hand position, whether it's wickets or open runs or timing. And you briefly touched on how much, you kind of have gleaned from Tony and Feed the Cats. With your, I don't know, this is something that I've been thinking about in terms of, not wanting our guys thinking when they're sprinting, essentially, is like similar to what Tony does, where it's like basically putting technical stuff on the quote unquote low days or X factor days. That it's still getting across, but it's not acutely in their brain, essentially,
right.
Of like, we did the sprint drills and then we immediately go sprint. But it's, not getting it in a way in an acute sense, but still getting it in a chronic sense about like it's still fitting the program. But with some of the, like maybe hand positions or like the wickets, or I guess, I don't know what you call them, like some of those like wicket, like step over type drills you do. Where do you fit? Like, are those more X factor for you, or are those more, quote unquote low day, non-sprint day? Like, where do you kind of?
Yeah, I mean, all right. So I actually if we're in a team setting or a large group workout with my North Broward Prep students, if it's tracks and we're going through a normal week, or really at any point that I have a group scheduled with our North Broward Prep student athletes, we're not doing wickets. And it's obviously not, me, what a proponent and fan I am of wickets. It gets really complicated when we're talking about my practices are everyone from a, sixth grade girl that is wondering why she has to be at track practice and her dad made her, to, potential future D1 football players that are seniors and frankly, like grown men, or at least young men, I should say. So rolling out wickets isn't necessarily the easiest thing for us to do. The couple times I've done it, I've found that I probably responded to the kids in a way that I wish I didn't, because I was so frustrated with myself. Kind of like exuding frustration on them, which is completely unfair to them. They were just didn't know what the heck they were doing, and it was challenging. So, there's some of those kids that just it's just not necessarily, and especially for like some of those sixth grade kids, like is the number one thing that we need to do wickets right now. You know what I mean? I wouldn't necessarily argue that that's the case. That doesn't mean that it's not a good idea for them or they can't jump in if we're, if we have them laid out. But I just noticed that like in my large groups, in my groups of just so far varied people and sizes, the wickets weren't necessarily something that was very applicable or functional to our setting. And again, that's meaning mine in particular, like our North Broward. I'm not saying our high school or middle and high school. I know plenty of coaches that use them very efficiently and fantastically. I use them in like those more kind of like speed school, quote unquote, sessions, or like kind of individual sessions that gives us, number one, I'm not so pressed for time. If a wicket gets kicked or something like that, we can go ahead and just adjust it and not so much worry about looking at the clock. So wickets are not necessarily going to be a part of our weekly training plans. So for me, I'm such a believer in what the wickets can help our students accomplish or solve in their sprint pattern that I want to find the way that we can kind of bring it to them. So that's where a lot of those step over drills came in, was like, okay, if I can just, without using too many words, have them feel what an upward projection is, feel what a mid-flight switch is of their legs, to feel what posture, really it's more so than anything, those things. And I'd argue really the same thing with wickets, is it's a postural application. If the student can organize themselves posturally, more often than not, especially because the wickets are there, everything else is going to fall into place. So through those step over drills, basically it's like it's a natural kind of transition towards wickets of a simple step over. And for those that haven't seen it, basically it's really just stepping over a hurdle with a switch and snapping the back leg into what we call the 3 bucket position. We'll then add a little bit of horizontal momentum, which will come through from like hops between. So that'll just kind of teach them, okay, we're moving forward, but we're still projecting upward. And then of course there's so much other, the constraint space, the hand position sprints, the PVC position sprints are kind of lining up parallel, but not necessarily in the same progression as those step over drills. And again, then ideally a kid would understand at least the concept of what we're looking for out of the wickets if they're willing to put in the effort to come on a Saturday when I have them out, or at least they'll be able to hopefully they felt what I'm talking about in terms of just an upward projection and being snappy from their lower half. So so with that said, those usually fall into, like, if it's track season, that might be honestly a part of kind of my specific warm up, or prep for the day. That might be a part of an X Factor type day where we use some, an X Factor isn't necessarily always a low day. We might still do some high effort. Again, the gallops probably find their way in there. Skips and some plyometrics still find their way on those days. That we might use some of those drills and have a little bit more technical kind of mindset to our sprint mechanics. Where that fits in just from a standpoint of equipment, I do some of those step over drills actually on our predominantly multi-directional day. And I know that sounds silly, but because we have the mini hurdles out there, we also go into like some lateral hurdle hops and stuff. So just because it's easy to, have the hurdles out there and kind of just apply stuff. And honestly, the kids don't know any different anyway, to be honest with you. It's okay. And regardless, that's going to be an important piece for us to maintain in our program throughout the year is upright sprint mechanics. So that kind of fits in a little bit of everywhere, mostly for like our on-campus sessions, usually some part of the kind of specific warm-up. And then on those like speed school days, we'll still use it as just like a progression into the wickets. So I'll already have it set up basically at their wicket spacing, and we'll go through some walking movements. We'll go through some hopping movements. And then we'll progress on once they're ready to go through the wickets. For the hand positions or other constraint-based like sprints, those are actually going to be like on our sprint timing day. So I'll have, again, we're always going to time those, and we'll probably time one, it might be, 2 with constraints, 2 straight up open sprint. We might do 3. It just depends on what the distance is and kind of where we're at. So we'll use that actually in our high sessions, that it's going to be a part of their all out sprinting. And it does, I think it might have a little more wear mentally, if the kids are thinking about it. Hopefully they're not. But purely the fact that we're introducing a constraint is slowing things down a little bit, and the intensities are naturally a little bit lower. We can work some of those things out. And I haven't really, I think kind of like technical runs or I don't know if I want to say longer duration runs, because then it sounds like I'm talking about mileage, but tempo type of ideas. Not necessarily tempo runs from a standpoint of like 110s or anything like that, but from a standpoint of, again, I just label them technical runs. We might push the distance a little bit further and the effort's dialed back a little bit, and the only intention is a technical intention. And I think that's kind of an important piece that we'll use sometimes as well. Again, just to, number one, if you're running longer, you're getting more strides, you're getting more practice. And of course you have to limit that from a volume standpoint and make sure that you're not overwhelming the kids. But from a technical standpoint, we've seen some benefit there as well, because 4 seconds might not be enough for them to feel what we want them to feel. You know what I mean? Again, that the feel usually comes from posture. The feel usually isn't, oh, coach, I rotated better on that one. You know what I mean? It's more often than not a postural, it's a pelvic positioning that is, again, there's a lot of ways that we can implement it, and we have throughout our programming.
Yeah, that's great. I like that you calling them technical runs instead of extensive tempo. We might have to
Right.
I'm going to text you, Deed. Because the last summer, that was one for us that helped us a ton. Was obviously we were implementing the extensive tempo purely just from a work capacity standpoint, getting ready for the season. But probably the biggest benefit that we saw was, guys just, like you said, getting longer durations to feel different positions that we were talking about. But I think even B was the heightened volume, which you obviously have to be aware of. It helped some of the technical inefficiencies rear their head even more, or like poor interactions with the ground. Whereas like, hey, if on a Monday we were hitting 6 20-yard sprints with full rest, like no matter how inefficient you are, you can probably make it through that and be like, all right, I'm feeling good, let's go.
Sure.
Whereas if you got whatever, even just like light, like 10 100s at, extensive pace, you might come out of that like, coach, my shins are blown up. And then we can be like, oh, well, maybe let's look at, so that's an area where it helped us. It almost like made technical inefficiencies rear their heads quicker because of the volume. And, it helped us like basically identify some of those inefficiencies in a way that you could see in their sprinting, but we were able to see like almost what were the higher order inefficiencies for each kid.
Absolutely.
By just, pouring the tap on of a little more volume.
Absolutely. And and it's, certainly I think when fatigue hits, everything goes out of the window usually, and usually that's when injuries happen. So we're going to train there, and it's necessary to train there. And I'm talking about in this instance of extensive tempos. We ought to do it with intent, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, usually during track season, if I'm talking about a 100-meter sprinter, it's not necessarily going to be that extensive from a tempo standpoint. But again, just kind of I'm going to hesitate to use the word modeling because I don't necessarily mean like race modeling, but just some modeling and patterning of that, I think provides benefit and guaranteed if they perform, another thing that I've talked about in the last few days is if a kid doesn't start that way, it's going to be, especially if it's in an extensive tempo type of session, if you're running, okay, if it's 10 100s or whatever it may be, by rep 7 or 8, forget about it. They're going to be so gassed that they're not going to probably be able to make those technical adjustments. But if they were to start off the bat like that, then it's much easier for them to hold that, and they're going to realize how much easier that was, more likely than not. They're definitely going to be in less pain. And then probably when you come back to a high day, whenever that may be, I think you definitely build greater resiliency against injury versus having a kid that they're probably not going to pull a hamstring running a slower pace tempo, but that might have a wearing effect on them for the next high day if they're not, performing, again, if they've got terrible technique for however much volume that is, that's going to do something to them, and it's going to be negative. Whereas on the opposite side of things, now if you look at that volume and that yardage as much more valuable volume and yardage because you have an intent of technique and form, that's still, when they're moving at a slower rate there, I think it becomes, because I can just visualize myself, like if I'm kind of trotting or running some sort of tempo pace on maybe one of my earlier ones and I'm not gassed after probably 3 right now, if I'm feeling fresh and I'm kind of trotting, because you're going through it slower, right? So it's not something that's so high, fast paced and worried about the intent isn't necessarily just to run as fast as possible, although it might feel like that towards the end. If the intent is something technical, to me, I feel like you can kind of use a little bit more of that sort of mental imagery and a little bit more of that. Like, I still don't think it's going to necessarily be something that a coach is going to be shouting out cues the whole time. But if the athlete has a model that they can kind of visualize or go back to when they're in that, because that's really what I can do. I mean, if I'm running tempos and I'm getting gassed or even early on, I can kind of think of what I want myself to look like, and it's a little bit easier in that than it is if you held a stopwatch or put a laser out there for me and told me to sprint as fast as I can. If I tried to make it the model of whatever's in my head, either I'm going to not run very fast or it's not going to look anything like that, or my timing's going to be off. So I just think I think there's value there, and that's also something that we've tried to, we've used to an extent as well.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it. It's almost like the double-edged sword where if you rack up whatever, okay, we hit 2,500 yards of extensive tempo today, and you're an extremely technically proficient sprinter, then you just snapshotting the foot interacting with the ground, you just racked up, thousands of very quality contacts, essentially.
Absolutely.
Or on the flip side, you've racked up thousands of inefficient, contacts. So it's
correct.
It's not just is tempo good or bad? It's like, well, if you're based off of your technical proficiency, it's just gonna make some things come to the surface maybe a little faster.
Yep. 1,000,000%.
Cool. We are through the questions that we had down. Anything else pop up for you, Andrew?
No, not right now.
Cool. We're right at about an hour or so. should be good. We can get like a clean like ending, and then we'll stop recording. And
Sweet.
Cool. All right, appreciate you coming on, Coach. This was great. I mean, we both have appreciated your content for quite some time, and then even getting to chat and meet you, virtually in person, I guess. And then, but yeah, thanks for taking the time.
No, I appreciate you guys again. Thank you for not just doing what you're doing, but for including me in on it. It's been a great opportunity. I'm thankful to be able to talk some things out, and as you can see, it's many things that I'm still spinning wheels on. Many things that probably throughout our career we'll continue spinning our wheels on and thinking about and changing and altering and seeing what fits best for our particular position, school, kids, clientele that we're working with. I appreciate you guys playing a part of it, and this definitely gives me the opportunity to get some of those thoughts and grow on my own. So I appreciate it.
Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks a ton.